Hey everyone, welcome back to Board Game Breakdown. I'm Kristofer Solomon here with our first video of 2023, and we are looking at Ark Nova. So this is a brand new game to me. I got it for Christmas. It has gotten a very huge following very quickly over this past year. I'm super stoked to have it, and we are going to look at an in-depth viewing of it today in this video. But you might be saying, hey Chris, I don't have 45 minutes to watch board game videos. So I have a link here that you can click on to get to a very abbreviated version of the video. I'm calling these videos board game breakdown bursts, where I'm trying to condense everything down to 3 minutes or less to give everyone a really quick view and some thoughts on it. So if you don't want to spend 45 minutes watching the in-depth version, click there, check that out. You can always go to our website, boardgamebreakdown.com, and check out our text reviews if you'd rather have a written format. But today we are going to look at the setup of this in a two-player game. We're going to go through the different actions you take with these cards, and then I'll play a couple quick rounds to show you the flow of everything. Again, check out our website, subscribe to our YouTube videos so you can make sure to check out all the new things we put out. Find us on Instagram and any other social media. And with that, let's get started with Ark Nova. All right, welcome to the setup portion for Ark Nova. And if you know anything about this game, you know that it is pretty gigantic as far as how much table space it takes up. So I'm breaking this setup into 3 sections. So we're going to look at the main board, which is this one. We'll look at the association board, and we'll look at the individual zoo boards. That will hopefully make it a little easier for you to see everything in different sections as we go through. So let's first look at the main board. I put out a few pieces already, so let's talk about these. You will have 3 different trackers for each color player that is being played. So in this example, I'm setting up for 2 players, a yellow player and a blue player. And there are 3 different tracks that you will be placing these on. So you have the reputation track, which is here by this little, it's represented by the little graduate cap. So you'll have them both start here in 1, and it works all its way down to 15. You have the appeal track, which are represented by these tickets. So you'll see that it starts with 0 here, and it works its way this way and around and up, ending up there in the top left. And then you also have trackers on the conservation points represented by these green shields, and they're going to work its way down this bottom, and it's going to go down this way and wrap back around. And you'll see that the 2 trackers go in opposite ways, and when we get to the gameplay section, you'll understand how that works. You also have another token over here. This is the break token. Looks like a little coffee mug, and you'll put it on this break track. And there are different numbers here depending on the player counts. Like I said, we're playing 2 players, so we'll set that there. You also have these tokens that you'll flip over. You'll see that they have the conservation shield on them, and you're going to draw 4 of them, and you're going to place them here randomly. So each game these will be different, and these are like special bonuses that players will get as they move down this conservation track. The ones that you did not select out of the 4, you just put back in the box. And then lastly, you have your giant deck of zoo cards here. There's 212, and you're going to take 6 of them, and you're going to place them in these spots here on the reputation row, and you're going to leave them face down for the time being, because we're not going to flip them over until we are completely done with this setup. That is it for the setup board. Let's move on to the association board. So this is what the association board looks like, and you'll see when we get to the action phases that you can take an action called association, and you're going to move workers over onto this board to take certain actions. So there's just a little bit of setup to do here. What you want to do is you're going to first fill in this little section with your partner zoo tokens. So you'll see that there is a token for each continent here. You're just going to place one on each, like so. And then you have the academic section over here. So we'll place one of those on each. And these are actually going to get refilled each round as part of like the cleanup phase. And then over here you have where you can make donations. And again, we're doing this for a 2-player game. And for a 2-player game, you're going to take some cubes of a color that you're not using, and you're going to cover up this left side because these are not available in a 2-player game. So you just use those to mark those so that everyone knows that they can only use this rightmost column here. Lastly, you need to set up your conservation projects down here. So I'm going to slide this up just slightly. And so you have a deck like this. It's got the shield that matches the shield from the main board for the conservation points. You're going to shuffle them up, and you're going to place them out below this board. And you'll see here that you typically use 3 unless you're using a 4th spot, and use that if you have 4 players. But we're doing 2, so we're just going to shuffle these up, and we're going to flip these over, and we're going to place them here. Let me zoom out so you can actually see the card all the way, because you will need to see the bottom. All right, let's do that. So there's 1, there's 2, there's 3. And then we're going to take our same little cubes that we used over here, and we're going to use them to block some of these, because in a 2-player game, you only want 2 available. So on the leftmost cards, you're going to block this one. On the middle card, you're going to block the middle one. And the right card, you're going to block that one. So that way, there's only 2 spots available for the 2 players. We will not discuss exactly what these cards mean right now. We'll wait until we get to the action and the gameplay portion of that. But that is all you have to do for the association board. So now let's look at the individual zoo boards. All right, lastly here we have our individual zoo boards, and these are double-sided, and they have a letter or number right here. And so this one is map A. This is the one that's recommended to use for beginners, but you'll see that there's other maps. They're double-sided, like I said. Some of them give you some asymmetrical player powers for the more complex players. There's also a medium weight one that you can use, but you just give those out depending on the skill level of the people playing. And then we're going to just stick a few things on here before we play. So up here you see the rest of our components that came with each player color. Basically you have 4 workers. So what you're going to do is you're going to take 1 worker and put them on your notepad. That is your available worker here at the beginning. And the other 3 workers go in these slots here laying down, and you can make them available as the game goes on. You also want to grab $25. Keep that on your notepad up there. Then you just basically have a bunch of cubes, and you're going to take the cubes, I think 7 right here, and you're going to place them on this little track. So as you complete conservation projects, you'll be moving these cubes off of this track to mark that you've completed the projects, and you will get that ability that is marked on here. Again, we can talk about that more as we go through the actual gameplay. All right, so sometimes on your map you have some special things that you need to do at the beginning. Like this beginner's map, you do get a free 3-spot enclosure, and it tells you have to place it there. So you get an enclosure token. So one side, this side shows that it's empty. This is how you show that there's an animal in it, but you're going to start out with it empty like that. And then you'll also take one of these tokens, which this side is a kiosk, which earns you money. This side is a pavilion, which get you appeal, and you're going to get a free kiosk there. So just depending on what your map is, you might have to put out some stuff like that, but there'll be a note here that informs you about that. And then lastly, you are going to take your action cards, and everyone has a set of 5, and one side is blue for level 1 and one side is kind of purplish for level 2. And what you're going to do is you're going to always take the animal card and you're going to sit it in slot 1 here, and the other ones you're just going to shuffle up randomly and then throw them in the rest of the slots. And these are going to determine how you take your actions throughout a regular round, which we'll discuss on the next little go through. And then also you are going to end up with 8 zoo cards, and so you'd have a hand like this. So sometimes you have these conservation cards, sometimes you have sponsor cards, sometimes you have animal cards. You're going to keep 4 of these, so I'm not going to do that right this second. I'll choose those off camera, and we'll talk about that when we get into the gameplay. And then you're also going to have 2 final scoring cards that look like, backs look like this. Anytime you see this emblem, that means it has something to do with the end of the game, and you're going to get 2 of these. So let's say we got large animal zoo and small animal zoo. At some point in the game, when you get to a certain or when any of the players get to a certain point total, you're going to end up discarding one of those. So we'll have to figure that out later. But that is basically it for the setup. So what we're going to do now is take a small break, and then we'll come back and I'll actually go through each of these actions and discuss what they mean before we play a couple rounds of the game. All right, so before we play a couple rounds, I want to look at all 5 of the actions down here and just give you a little detail on how they work. So we're not trying to explain that as I'm going through the game. Some of these. All right, so I mentioned in the setup that you're going to use these 5 cards for your actions. And the way this works is on your turn, you're going to select one of these to do and say, I wanted to do this one. Whatever slot it is in, that is the power that it's going to use it. So I would be able to use this at a power of 3. I would pick it up, I would do whatever it needs to happen, and then what goes on then is this moves to the first slot and these move over. So the further a card is this way, the more powerful it becomes. And once you use it, then it slides all the way to the left, thus becoming a power of 1. So you can still do the same action multiple times, it just won't be as powerful. You also have a chance to get these little X tokens, which you can use in conjunction with the card. So maybe I wanted to use this at power of 3, but I really want it to be a power of 5. I could discard 2 X's. So 3 plus 2 is 5, and I would be able to use that at a power of 5. So a turn is just going to be you picking one of those actions to do, triggering it at whatever power, discarding any X's that you might need to use, moving it to the left, pushing them over, and that's the other player's turn. So let's look at each of the actions quickly. So I'm going to put animals back at number 1 because that's how the game starts. You'll notice I don't have the main board showing because it's just too much to look at. But if the main board is needed for these actions, I'll make sure to put a little insert into the video with that. But for the most part, most of the actions are going to take place here on your main board, or I mean on your zoo board, on the association board, or building out your little tableau, which we'll do in this blank spot over here. So the first one we'll look at is animals. So this card allows you to play animal cards from your hand. Now, I will go ahead and mention that all of these can be flipped over at some point and be upgraded. I'm going to just concentrate on this side. I think that will be simple enough. And then if you ever decide to play the game yourself, you can have this be a surprise. So if you'll see here, depending on what power you play it at is going to determine how many animal cards you can play. So when it's at number 1, you can't even play an animal card. So on your first turn, you'd have to do something else to get the animal card to move down. And then you could play either one card, or if you get it all the way up to 5, you can play 2 animal cards. So I mentioned the setup that you're going to start out with 4 cards like this. So let's just look at an animal card and kind of go over what's going on here in this card. So right here we have a snowy owl. So there's a couple different things going on here. The most important thing you're going to want to pay attention to is right up here in the top left. Every card, every animal card is going to have a number inside this hexagon, which is how big the enclosure needs to be for it to be in. And then right underneath this little square is the amount of money that you have to pay to put it out there. So you'll see that looks very similar to the money tokens. So for the snowy owl, we need at least an enclosure of 1, and we need $11. Underneath there, sometimes there will be little icons within these red bands, and these are requirements. So for the snowy owl, we would need 2 bird tokens, or 2 bird cards already in our zoo. Up here, you'll see once we play this, that this counts as 1 bird tag, and it also counts as this Asia continent here. Then there's some text, actions, they're all going to be different. And then down here you have an appeal amount, which is in this ticket, and you'll move that track up 4, and then this one happens to give you a reputation of 1, and you'd move that track up when you played it. So if you could play the card, which we couldn't technically play this one right now, but we're going to cheat and act like we are, we would place it out here. We would pay our $11. So I change that in for the bank. I would then find an enclosure of at least 1, and we have a 3 out here. At this point, we flip this over to this side, showing that there is an animal in there. So the owl is taking up that. We would then move our appeal for our reputation 1, and then we would do whatever this says. And this one happens to say draw 4 cards from the deck, keep 2 and discard the others. So we would do that, and that would be our action. So you can see there that there's quite a few icons that you've got to pay attention to. And when you pick out your 4 starting cards, you definitely want to pick out cards that have animals that you can get out early. As you'll notice, the snowy owl, I would have needed 2 birds already out there. You also might want to have ones that meet these requirements up here that we'll talk about more when we get to the association board. But this one does because it has a bird icon, and we need bird icons there. So that is how you play animal cards. Now, how do you get more cards? So here we have the cards card, and you'll see that it says right off the bat, break 2. So in the setup, you saw that I had a little coffee mug token that goes down a break track. This would mean that you would need to move that 2 spots. Once the coffee mug gets to the end, it does trigger some things, but we'll talk about that after we discuss all 5 cards. So you would move the break track twice, and then you would draw cards from the deck or snap. We'll talk about that in a second as well. And you would draw them based off of what power you're using. So right now we're in 2. You look at 2, we would draw 1 card. Now, sometimes you have to draw cards and then discard 1. Sometimes you can just draw cards the more powerful it is. Snapping only occurs when it's in power 5. That means you can take any card from those 6 right side up cards that we have on the reputation row from the main board. So sometimes you don't want to draw from the deck because you don't know what's coming, but there's a card out there. You can get this all the way down to 5 and snap and grab the 1 card directly from the board and put it in your hand. Next, we have build. So you saw when we played an animal that we had to flip that over. But say that's flipped over, how do we get more enclosures? Well, you're going to use this build function. So it says here, build 1 building with a maximum side of X, which is whatever power you're at. And so if we wanted to build another one of these, We could right here because it had 3 spaces and we're using it at a power of 3, but you do have to pay $2 per space. So to put out another one of those, we'd have to pay 6. And on this side, we can only build these types of enclosures. On the flip side, you would get to build some special enclosures. So the standard enclosures, there are ones that are just one spot. We have 2 spots. We have 3, 4. We go all the way up to 5. And then there are some special enclosures that once you flip it over, like these large bird aviaries, that you can actually put 5 different species in, or less depending on how much space they take up. And then also you can build the pavilions or the kiosks for 1 space depending on what you need there. So if we want to build, let's say we want to build a 2 spot, we could, because it's 3 and this is only taking up 2 spaces. We'd pay our money, and then we would take this and we'd place it out on the board. Now there are some rules about where you can place them. When you first come onto the map, say you were playing a map that didn't give you a starting, it has to come in from a corner or an edge. Once you've got something placed, then the buildings or the enclosures have to touch each other. So we'd have to place this here or here. If you place it over one of these yellow spots, so here's $5, say we placed it there, we'd immediately trigger that and get $5. You cannot place on the rocks, you cannot place on the water, you cannot place on these until your build card has been flipped over. So there are some restrictions there. If you ever fill up your whole map, you get 7 appeal. That is what that icon is up there. Remember, you keep it flipped over like this until you play an animal into it, and then you can place it like that. All right, next we have, let's cheat a little bit and let's talk about sponsors next before we move to the association board. So sponsors are one of the other types of cards you might have instead of the animal cards. So they usually have this like blue ribbon, and they do not cost money, they just cost power. So the sponsor card tells you play 1 sponsor card with a maximum level of X, that being the power, from your hand. Or you can break, which means move the coffee mug 4 or 5, whatever power, and gain that much money. So this is kind of like your card you can use to get funds if you don't have any money to play animals. So let's look at a sponsor card. So we could play this one because we're doing it at a power 4, and it's at a power 4. And it basically has a lot of different icons on it. Most of these have to do with scoring or giving you extra abilities. So this says each time a research icon, which is the little microscope, is placed into any zoo, so mine, opponent, whoever, I would gain $2. There's also sometimes yellow actions down here. This lightning bolt means you trigger it immediately as it's played. So we would look at all of our magnifying glass research tokens or icons in our zoo, including this one. Oh, sorry, hit the camera. And we would get a 1 appeal for it. And then sometimes you have these brown sections, which always are end game things. So this says gain 1 conservation point for 5 different animal category icons. So that would be something we would score at the end of the game. So if I use this, I would move this back over here because I used all 4 power, and this would go on my tableau just like I place the animals. So I like to have my sponsors in one area, my animals in another, because a lot of times the sponsors you have to pay attention to as you're playing, because you don't want to miss out on getting the money every time someone plays microscope into their zoo. Lastly, we have the association. So the association card has to do with the board up in the top right and your workers. So you start out with 1 worker, this dude here, on your notepad, doing different things and moving down different tracks. You'll eventually score other workers, and if you gain another one, you take them from the bottom and move them into your notepad. This map happens to give you 2 conservation tokens once you get all workers available, or 2 conservation points, sorry. So what you'll do is here it says perform one association task with a maximum value of X. So again, depending on which slot it's in, is going to help determine what happens up here on the association board. And you'll see on the association board that there are different amounts of power up here for each of these things. So let's quickly go through these. I'm going to skip this one for a minute because it has to do with the back side of the card. But if you pay 2 power, you can move 1 worker up here, and this would allow you to move down the reputation track. So you would move it down 2 spots, which gives you more abilities or a larger pool of cards to draw from. Now, before we move on, you can place more workers on a spot, so you could trigger something again, but if you have 1 worker there, you'd have to have 2 workers then to play. So you eat up a lot of workers if you are going to be doing the same action over and over again, and you're not going to get these workers back until a break occurs, which again we'll talk about next. So let's just go with this. 1 worker. If you want to spend 3 power, you place a worker here, and you can take one of these partner zoos. So you can have 1 of each continent, and what you will do is you will select which partner zoo you want. So let's just say Asia, Australia, and you place it at the bottom here. So you're available to get 2 partner zoos until you have flipped over your association card and upgraded it, and then you can actually get 4. What's the point of the partner zoo? Well, it allows you to play any animal card from that continent at a discount of $3. And then as you move up, you kind of unlock these other abilities. The Australia token would stay empty until the break occurs, and then you refill that. So it's not exactly a race to get them. Your opponent can still get Australia, but they would have to wait until the next round. If you play 4 power, you can place this here, and much like the partner zoo, you would take an academic token. So we could take this, and you place it at the bottom there, and this gives you 1 microscope in your zoo, thus fulfilling something like this, and also lets you move 2 up the reputation track, much like this does. You also have a token here that just gives you straight up 2 microscopes, and then your last token here lets you move up 1 reputation, and then this icon allows you to keep 5 cards in your hand at each break instead of only 3. Again, much like the partner zoos, if you got all 3, you would trigger these different things that happen, and you would get more conservation points typically for doing that. Lastly, you have right here what takes 5 power, and this is to place a cube on a conservation project. So if you spent 5 power and put a worker there, this is your chance now to secure one of these spots. So if you meet these requirements, so we'll look at this would need either 2 Asia icons in your zoo or 4 Asia icons. These are bird icons, so either 2 or 5. And these are herbivores, either 4 or 5 icons. So if you meet one of those requirements, let's just pretend that we met the 2 birds, then I could place a worker here, spend 5 power, and I would choose one of these cubes over there, and I would move it and place it on the 2 there. So let's just look over here. This is split up into 2 sections. The top section, these purple ones mean you get them on each income phase, which happens during a break, but you also would get to trigger it right now. This is a little bit bigger rewards, but you just trigger them right now. You don't additionally get it during an income phase. So let's just pretend we wanted this cube here. So that would give us $5 now. It would also give us $5 at every break, and we would take that and we would put it there. So what does that mean? We would get the 2 shields. We can no longer play any cubes on that. So if we got 5 bird tokens or icons in our zoo, we can't also take that one. We're done with that one. That's available for the other opponent to take if they want, but we could put cubes on any of these. Now, there is a chance that you have conservation projects in your hand. So that is the 3rd type of card. So you'll see the backs look exactly like animals and sponsors, but the flip side is conservation project. This is a little different than these. These are the base conservation projects, which in the setup I showed you come with backs like this, so they're separate. But what you could do is if you played your worker there and played 5, you could play one of these straight from your hand if you met the requirements, and it goes at the top. And you'll see that there's 2 open spots for 2 players, a third for 3, and a fourth for 4 players. So you'd place it up there. You would place your cube from over there onto whatever spot that you took, and then you could no longer play on this one. Now, if someone else played an additional conservation project card, they would slide yours down, and there would be those 2 available. Now, you could play on this person's, they could play on this. If additionally they ever put a third one up here, because we're only playing with 2 players, this one would actually fall off and no longer be available, and those 2. So they would keep cycling through. So you would have a limited chance of getting to play on these top cards, but these 3 will stay on there the whole game, no matter if they get filled up or not. So that is, well, we will talk about this quickly. If you ever do flip over the association, you get the chance of also donating every time you take one of these actions. So say we took this and we took a partner zoo, we then have a chance to pay, starting up here at the top left, $2 for a conservation point. So if we paid our $2, we would take one of our cubes, our extra cubes, not from the left side over there, just our extra, we'd place it there. So then the next person who did it would have to pay a $5 donation, $7, $10. Eventually you would get down here and you do not cover this one up. Everyone has a chance of moving forward. They could pay $12 and always score an additional conservation point on the track. So that takes care of the association board. That takes care of all of 5 actions that you would have on your board. Lastly, we'll discuss the break track. So as I said, you'll move the coffee mug down. Whoever moves it to the very last spot, there's a nice little key here that explains exactly what to do. The person that moves it to that last spot, they get an additional X. They also then trigger the discard. So if you have not gotten that academic token that allows you to have 5 cards, you have to discard down to 3. If you do have that token, you can discard down to 5. If you have any bonus, 2-time bonus tokens, or these kind of adverse effects like constrictor, these happen when people play attack cards on you, you get rid of all those at the break. You also take all your workers back off of the board. You refill the partner zoos, you refill the academic spots. You discard the cheapest 2 cards off of the track, and then you push all the cards down and refill from the back end. And then lastly, you take all of your income. So the income is based off of what appeal your zoo is at, as well as any kiosk you have in your zoo, and any extra cards, sponsors, or animals that might be giving you income. So that's the main way you get your money. And then you reset the coffee mug back to where it originally started. So if a 2-player game, we'd put it on 2, and then we start from there. So there's no real certain amount of rounds you play. The way the end game is triggered is once a player's appeal token on the track and conservation token cross each other, that triggers the end of the game, and that means everyone else has one more turn before there's final scoring. So that takes care of all that. Let's set the game back up and we'll play just a couple rounds from a 1-player perspective so you can see how the flow works. All right, so we're going to just go through a couple rounds. I'm going to do this a little differently. I'm just going to play for the yellow players. I'm not going to worry about the blue. There's not enough table space for you to see everything. And I think you'll just get a feel for how it works as far as a turn goes just by looking at the one player. There's not a ton of interaction between players. I mean, sometimes there's taking of cards that the other player might want. There are some actions on certain cards that affect other players, but for the most part, you might think of this as multiplayer solitaire, which I know some people don't like, but I'm okay with it. So I've drawn 4 new cards here that are a little better for starting than what I used during the setup. And we'll just play a couple rounds and you see how it works. So we've got our cards out here. So let's see, what do we want to do? If we look at our cards, we'll see that we've got some bird icons here, and that is one of the conservation projects to complete. So I probably want to get those out early. I will need some enclosures, and I will also need to be able to pay for these. There's also one of these you can use, but you'll see that it has a 6 power, and right now the maximum we have is 5. We would need X for that. So let's see. Let's just go ahead and play. Well, let's get some zoos out here. That will help us, partner zoos. So if we use this, perform 1 association task with a maximum value of X, which is 5. So I want to take my 1 worker I have, and I'm going to place them over here. I'm going to use the 3 of that 5. And let's see, I want to put out probably this cheapest guy first, which is a North American bird, or just America altogether, not just North America. So I'll take that continent and I'll place it here. So what that's going to do is allow me to pay things from that continent cheaper because now I have a partnership with that zoo. So you're going to take this, you're going to slide all these down, and put that there. Normally the next person would go, but we'll keep moving on. So now I would like to play this bird. So this was the bird I was mentioning. So I need a 2 enclosure, which I have available right now, a 3 enclosure. I need $12, but because I have a partnership now, I can do 3 cheaper, and it has no other requirements. So I'm going to go ahead and place this out here, which means I'm going to use this animal card. So I'll go ahead and put that there. So I need to pay $9 because 12 minus my 3 discount. So let me put this 20 over in the bank and get out 11 back for change. I'll just throw this up here. You also get 5 appeal, which are these tickets right here. So we're going to look down here and say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the appeal is going to really boost the finances that you get from your break. That's how you're going to earn money. And then we're going to do the action, which is sprint 1, which is draw 1 card from the deck. So the deck is right here. I'm going to draw this card, flip it over, and that's a pretty powerful card, but I'm going to need to have upgraded my animal cards, and it costs a whole lot of money, $36. So you probably won't see me play that. But we've got our first animal out there. We also have a bird icon working towards that, so that's good. So the next player would go. Now it's my turn again. So I do have another bird that I would eventually want to play that's going to need a 2. So I will go ahead and build. So how does this work? Build 1 building with a maximum size of X, which is 5, but I only need a 2 spot. Oh, by the way, I never flipped this over to show that my bird over there lives here. So anyways, I can use this and I can put a 2 spot out there. I'm going to place it like this. I need to pay 2 per space, so I need to pay 4. So I'll chunk this 5 over there and get $1 back. But since I placed this right here, I trigger that and I get $5. So I get my $5 back, put that up there. I then can move all these down, place build there. Now it's someone else's turn. Say it's back to me. I want to use this. So let's talk about this. So cards. First, we're going to break for 2. And you'll see up here we have our break icon. So 1, 2. That's going to work that way. And I can draw cards from the deck or snap. So because I'm playing it from the 5 power, I could draw 3 cards from the deck and discard 1. Or I could snap, which means I could take any of these cards that are out there. I do not have to have the correct reputation. I can just take the cards. So let's see. So there's more birds up here, but I would need that continent to be out there before I could play it. There's this big one up here, the flamingo, which needs to be built next to water, which that's pretty good because you'll see here that my 2 enclosure, but it needs a 3 enclosure. So I wasn't really thinking. So let's just do this. Let's just draw 3. 1, 2, 3. Flip those over. And here they are. And we're going to draw 1. Let's just pick this guy. And the other ones get discarded here. All right, so then that goes like this. All right, so what are my other options? I could play a sponsor card. I don't really have any I want to play right now. So the other option is you can break for X and gain that much money. So I could say break for 5 and gain $5. So what that means is I would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I would move this down. Boom. And I would get my $5. All right, so let's pretend that the opponent also breaks and say they break for 2 and it triggers this to go there. So we're going to work down our little key up here, and the person that triggered that, which in this case would be our opponent, they would get an X token and they would get to place it on their notepad. Next, we would discard down to 3 or 5. I would have to discard down to 3 because I do not have the academic token here that allows me to keep 5. So I'm going to discount down to 3. Put the other ones in the discard. We would discard any of these tokens. No one has any. We would refill this if we need to. So because I used a America icon, we would put that back there. We also get all of our workers back. So I would get my 1 worker and place him back over there. We get rid of the cards from the 1st and 2nd level. Oh, you know what? I have my cards backwards. That was a little confusing. So let's do this. That is actually the discard pile down here, and this card stack goes there. So what you would do is you would say 1, 2, go away. All these slide down, so in effect they become cheaper or cost less reputation to get, and you'd flip over 2 more. And then lastly, we would get our income. So our income is based on our appeal. So you'll see here that because we're at 5, this spot right here says 10. So we get $10 for the appeal. You also get additional money for like kiosks. So this kiosk is touching 2 different enclosures. So we get $2 for that. And then sometimes you have other cards or things that are impacting that, such as this over here, then you would take that money then. So put that there. Once that happens, we take our bowl of coffee mug, we move it back to where it started on 2, and then the person that did not trigger the break would now take their turn. So let's see. really want to get this other bird out there so I can show you how to get some conservation points. So here's the bird in question. So we have a 2 available. We have $13. So I'm going to take the animal here. I can play 1 card, move these down, put that there. I'm going to go ahead and put this out. So that's going to cost me $13. So 10, 11, 12, 13. So put those over there. We're going to flip over this enclosure to show that it is now in there. We're going to get 6 appeal, which means I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Move down that track. And then it says, after finishing the current action, which means once you've moved your card over to the 1 spot, which we did, you may place your build action card on either 1 or 5. So we could take build and we can move it up here, or we could move it down there. So I'm going to move it down there because I want association at 5, and I don't really have plans to build right this second, so it doesn't really matter. So at that point, then the other player would go. Let's pretend it's back to me. I'm going to use my association because I want to use 5 because I want to be able to grab that conservation project. So I would take my worker, I'd place them here. I have met this requirement. I have 2 bird icons in my zoo, 1, 2. I could then take something from over here, cube-wise, and move it and put it there. What this means is I get 2 shields. So up here, I'd say 1, 2. And I've hit this first little decision point where I could either get a second worker or an additional worker, I guess, depending on how many you have, or I could upgrade a card, which means I could flip one of my cards over. So let's just say I want to grab, let's just say I want to flip a card over. I now want to flip my association card over so that I can get more partner zoos. That I can do that. And because I did this cube, I now trigger this, which is an additional shield. But every time I take an income, which happens at the breaks, along with my money, I will get 1 additional green conservation point. Eventually, someone is going to get here first, and they're going to choose one of these things and take it off the board. Or they could always pick to get $5. Alternatively, they'll get there, and one of these actions will happen. And then eventually someone will get there. At this point, if you'll remember that we had these 2 final scoring cards at the beginning, we're going to choose which one to discard. So it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to finish the game, but that's how that would work. So you would keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Breaks would happen. You'd get income. You'd build out your tableau here. You would hopefully be moving both your appeal and your conservation points down. And so what happens to trigger the end of the game? Let's pretend that our appeal is at 20 and our conservation is at 30 so that you can see. And we'll pretend that we moved our appeal's at 30, let's pretend. And let's say we played a animal ticket and we move the appeal 1, 2 there. And so at that point, this black spot here is the scoring. So you'll see that they are in the same scoring zone. So as soon as they are in the same scoring zone, or if I were to have this here and say this guy was back here and I move this forward to, now they are also in the same scoring zone. And once they've crossed like that and entered the same scoring zone, then it means the end of the game is triggered. Everyone else gets an additional turn to see if they can get any extra points, and then the game is over. And what you do at that point is any of the brown in-game final scoring things, such as this card, you would say, okay, how many small animals do I have in my zoo? Oh, I have 3, so I can move that up 1 shield. So we'll move that up a shield. You might have other things in your zoos that trigger that. Say we don't, and this is how it is. Then what you will do is you would say, in this scoring zone that this thing is in, what is our least amount of value? So this would be 29 appeal. How many appeal did I get? 33. So 33 minus 29 is 4 for my ending score. Everyone would do the same thing. So you might think 4 is low, but a lot of times you end up with negative because it might be a case that your opponent might be separated a whole lot like this. So they would say, okay, my scoring zone, the lowest is 40. That would be my target. And I only got to 32. So that would be a -8. So you're probably going to have some low scores. In the solitaire game, you're actually just trying to get to 0 in order to win the solitaire game. So you can see how that works. But you would figure out your target minus your actual appeal. Whoever has the most wins the game. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how the game works, how the flow, what the actions are. I know it's a lot. It's a fairly heavy game. On Board Game Geek, it's rated 3.8, which is heavier than average. But my wife and I both really enjoyed it, and it seems hard, but once you get into it, it's pretty intuitive. It goes about 2 hours for 2 players. You might do it a little faster than that, but there's not a ton of downtime most of the time while the other player is deciding or taking their turn. You can easily be deciding what you're going to be doing because there isn't a ton of interaction. You don't have to wait for that player to finish their turn to really understand what you want to do next. So we've really enjoyed it. I highly recommend it if you like this type of game. If you like race games, because even though it sort of looks like an engine builder and there is some of that, it's really going to come down to who's going to cross these 2 markers first, because typically that person is going to win. So from the onset, it doesn't look too much like a race game, but I think after playing it, I really feel like it is. But I love it. It's been really great. I'm glad I got it. If you want to check out the text review, go to boardgamebreakdown.com or check us out on any other social media. Thanks for watching.